Okay. Hello. For those of you who maybe weren't with us for the last talk, my name is Chloe La, and I'm moderating this panel. Today we're going to be talking about the intersection of visual art and dance music, which is a topic very special to this festival in its cross-disciplinary nature. So I have a few guests, and I'm going to try not to butcher your names. Bogomir Doringer.
Thank you.
Yes, who is an artist and curator of projects at Dance Alone, Dance of Urgency, among a few other things that we'll hear about. I'm also joined by Jan Rolf, who is the artistic director of CTM Berlin, Sara Sassanelli, who is the curator of ISCA London, and Taut Vidas Orbelis, who's AUDRA's program manager and the reason why we're here today. So thank you so much. So these were pretty cursory introductions, so why don't we start by each of you going around and you can provide some more context about your background and the way in which your work touches art and dance music, if it does.
Okay, hello. So it's on me to start. All right, where do I start? We do a festival since 25 years that is actually born out of nightlife, born out of club culture, but also born out of the visual arts, because all the people who started it were actually having their own practice in arts and were working in nightlife. So we kind of sensed the potential of club culture, clubs as kind of non-conforming alternative art spaces in the 90s, because we also observed the practices of many people working there and performing and doing their thing, and it was obvious that it's way more than just dance music. And so the idea of our festival started from that point, that we wanted to make that more visible, we wanted to give more space to it for the interdisciplinary nature of clubbing actually, and the art produced and practiced in clubs, and also the role of everybody working in nightlife in different capacities, so to say. So starting from clubs as very interdisciplinary, multimodal, multisensorial places that are interdisciplinary in itself from the outset, and music is just a part of it. So, yeah, from there we developed, and the festival over the years grew and grew into a much wider variety of practices, and today we do exhibitions, we do performance art, we do club nights, concerts, lectures, talks, and we really try to unfold this interdisciplinary landscape with kind of music culture at the center, I would say, but really exploring music cultures in their connections to all forms of art, to social discourse, to topics that are relevant in society at large. Yeah, maybe that is enough as a start.
Yeah, and for me, like for past couple of years, I predominantly worked at Rupert, which is like leading transdisciplinary art center in Vilnius, Lithuania, but realizing that nightlife was sneaking more and more into the things that I was doing, and AUDRA popped off, like really, I wouldn't say like out of nowhere, but the first iteration was like a big thing, a really intense experience, and that was a clear sign. And also it had an art program that was in development, and that was a clear sign that there is a need and interest coming from the nightlife into arts. And so we got in touch, and AUDRA art program became an integral curated part of the festival, which has also a music program, I guess, which is like the biggest and most visible part of the festival, but also a youth program, like doing a lot of social activities, workshops, and things like that. And the idea that the festival is a city festival, I think, explains best a lot of also art program activities and my own curation and direction and approach that I have to the programs. And the aim is to not only merge and try to see what are the connective angles of both our contemporary art and nightlife. And I emphasize here contemporary art because that's an important distinction. Oftentimes we can find like a more stage art like circus and dance, and they won't really bring our contemporary art sensibilities, because I think and I think we will speak about that a bit later, it has a lot of edge to it and creates like a broad spectrum and a broad stroke where you can really expose people to new ideas, new experiences, and new sensibilities. And that exposure, I think, what AUDRA really is and the art program really is, it's like really descends upon the city. You might love it, you might not like it, you might feel many different feelings, but I think like our approach is really to give space for a lot of different practices, ideas, and see how it works and what works. It's like one large experiment that comes from the knowledge and long-lasting experiences of everyone in the team who were working in their fields for many, many years. So although the festival and art program is new, like it comes with a huge, really interesting baggage. So I think that's what I do and what the festival is about in very brief.
Yes, so I work at ICA. I'm the curator of Live there, and I predominantly work with dancers and choreographers. But maybe about 8 years ago, when I had like a much drier institutional job, I started programming performances in clubs. And then I had like a very short career as DJ, and I retired immediately. And it was just like too stressful. And then, I carried on working at ICA with dancers that I would call kind of expanded dance practices. So you could call them interdisciplinary or like collaborative. And through those, I was also working with a lot of electronic musicians. And then I also work at Conditions, which is an alternative education program, and choreographic practices and rave also come into that quite a lot in our discussions. And I think we'll probably go into this a bit later, but I think generally practices are really expanding. And so I've been trying to be kind of as agile as possible as a researcher and a curator to sort of accommodate for those changes as well.
Where do I start? I guess I'm an artist who experienced to learn to dance in times of social political crisis, which was during the crashing of Yugoslavia and during the wartime. So for me, dance was never really this just joyful or pleasurable kind of awarding ritual that we do because we work hard during the week, and on a weekend we like to get wasted. But it had this really almost coping mechanism function that I dance because if I don't move, I will collapse or die. Or so learning to move as individual throughout the difficult times and then collectively, which eventually became, for example, Exit Festival that some of you might know today. So like the birth of that scene was coming from urgency, and today is like a fund supported by Ministry of Culture, let's say. And then after moving to Netherlands, I tried to put it in some kind of context because obviously dancing did not have such a dramatic urgency. And I tried to understand like what the fuck was I living and what was that? And then that gave birth to the project that you mentioned, I Dance Alone, which is this idea that by observing dance floors from a bird's eye view in a similar way that happened here yesterday, you can see what movements are happening there, who are the individuals that dare to move, who are the individuals that don't dare to move, how you as locals move together or don't move, what stops you. So really like trying to understand dancing ritual from that kind of bigger perspective, and then feed that into different curations, films, essays, etc. Yeah. So yeah, I would say that it's always interdisciplinary, but it always comes from the experience and what we lived and what we feel and how that somehow resonate from body into the space. And then yes, music plays an important role because it moves us, but I also did experience parties where music is good but nobody moves, which is also somehow says something about the time in which we live or society in which the dancing is happening. Yeah.
So my first question, I suppose, is kind of a more basic one, but it's for all of you. Why is collaborative cross-disciplinary work important? And what are the aims of bringing together different actors from art, culture, and nightlife? Like, why do what you do?
I guess I can start with this one. I feel that we have I think because everything is collaborative, but we have a tendency to, in a way, forget it. Like we have like this weird and outdated idea from biology, all the different animal kingdoms as if everything is separated. But that's not the case. Everything is collaborative, symbiotic, and in order to do anything meaningful or really anything, you have to work together with others. And the more reciprocal exchange happens, the better the results or the better the process is. And we often tend to reserve collaborative efforts for artists as if it's some like really special, a God-given talent, but it's really not. And my own experiences, like bringing artists into nightlife scenarios or bringing DJs into contemporary art spaces, where they were surprising in a ways how surprised people were about their similarities or the points that they can connect. So you think that I see you as like really compatible but different duo, and you think that everyone sees that, but that's not the case. So I think in this sort of interesting way of that we are like unique, each of us are unique, but then coming in together and finding the ways to make things in a collaboration reveals such a nurturing process and adds a lot value and surprise. I think surprise is one of the key aspects, and without like the curiosity that comes along with it, we would sort of loop in this endless loop of sort of lukewarm hedonism.
Yeah, I mean, the element of surprise is interesting because I've been thinking about the relationship between live performance and rave as both two things that I think kind of can disorganize the senses. And that's like been interesting to me as well to observe. In the past, I would say 10 years in London, I feel like dancers and choreographers are using the materials of rave in really interesting ways. So like the fog, the sweat, the heat, the lights, like some in really direct ways, some in really abstract ways. And so I started seeing this relationship kind of already developing, and then I sort of started responding to it more in my curatorial practice. So I actually like learned a lot in the process of bringing performances to the club as a curator, because I guess like in London at the time in the clubs, there was also a lot less red tape. I mean, it's tricky with ICA because I would say generally at ICA there also is a lot less red tape than in the other places that I was working in. So that relationship has slightly changed and shifted. But yeah, there was like more risk and more surprise going on in the club.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to it, maybe what I find relevant also in what you just said is that what I also experienced as a person going to clubs, working in clubs, also as a kid or as a young person, and when it was not that loaded yet with the idea of art performances and so on, it was already happening. And actually I conceived the club as a space where literally everyone who was present was contributing to that experience in these different capacities and roles, be it at the bar, making the lights, being in the audience, being at the door, whatever, decoration, just dancing and so on. So I think it was inherently and is inherently this kind of multidisciplinary collaborative production of something that is a form of art, of an experience. And when we bring performances that are collaborative and do this kind of interdisciplinary, intermedia work, they just heighten that experience and put awareness to it. And a crucial element is this kind of agency that is possible to sense or to feel, that it's actually everyone can have an agency in that setting. And that is important not to forget as kind of one of the, I would say, the impulses that are also picked up by collectives working on performances in that setting, really. So.
Yeah, I think important is to mention that we're talking about night very often, and night has been always being a time when those that don't have a space in a daylight would often sort of appear, unite, or those that are challenging daily norms or daily life or traditional values, or those that are not accepted. So then we have this kind of moment that while everybody is sleeping, there is this group of people practicing their ritual, their form of communication, challenging also what is art, because art very often, if it's institutionally managed, was betraying a lot of communities and people. For example, women did not have a voice in art for a long time. Queer community, especially during, for example, AIDS pandemic, was totally pushed on outskirts, and then clubs were the places where they could still feel being seen, etc. So that sort of, again, dramatic experience, and it's a place where we learn how together we can manage to dance. And once we have that experience, then we can apply that in a form of self-organization, as started originally raves, or as well what happened in Berlin. And then you can kind of come into the spotlight, or not spotlight, but sunlight. So those processes are very important. And I think what you were mentioning is also this dramaturgy, an intensity of an experience, which is like when you go to clubs, or festivals, it's a full-on audiovisual exposure, sleep deprivation. So we're in a very different state of mind and physicality as well. You mentioned the change of raves coming into the stage or being kind of exhibited, and artists being inspired with it. And I think that the point is that we're also witnessing, especially in Europe, many generations that did not necessarily experience extremely dramatic situations as Second World War or refugee crisis, in a sense that we were running away. So these clubs are, for me, I think, interesting, and I was wondering why so many of us are so inspired with it, because they are turbulent environment in which we live something that is very different than the daylight is. So that's in short.
Yeah, I want to touch on something that you brought up. Just about accessibility. And I'm curious, funding for the arts is generally more accessible in the EU than in, say, the US. Where I am from, there are undeniably obstacles that come to working within this space, and I'm curious what the greatest challenges are that you each respectively face in securing the resources you need to realize your projects, especially maybe what the differences are between being affiliated with an institution and working more, as an independent curator.
Getting funding is really hard, especially right now. In the UK, I think the situation is pretty bleak in the sense that Arts Council is definitely diminishing. In my practice specifically, it's quite funny. I'll try go for a corporate sponsorship and they'll be like, your work is too weird. And the Arts Council is like, your work is not weird enough. Or, like there's always these challenges and barriers. So yeah, I think a lot of at the moment, I'm thinking a lot about how to basically like find hacks to get the money. So whatever I can do to basically secure it and then to do the project that we want to do. And I think that's the conditions a lot of people are in at the moment. I mean, the amount of times as well that I'm like, what narrative are we creating here for this project to come through? But then, I mean, if the project happens, great.
I mean, do you ever feel like you have to tailor the curation or the narrative in order to secure funding?
Definitely, yeah, all the time.
But like to the detriment of what it is you're showing?
I mean, I don't think, not to the detriment of the work itself, because I think there's ways of then just making the work that you want to make, and that's what I would encourage artists to do. But yeah, I think it can be a limitation, especially if you're trying to work with corporate sponsorship where a lot of the time that's just like bigger chunks of money, so it is very appealing. And you also don't have like evaluations that you have to spend like 3 nights writing. So yeah, I think it's swings and roundabouts, but I think there's like hacks, I would call them.
I think it's one of the many roles of a curator and producer to be creative in working with these expectations and constraints that come from the funding bodies in a way, because I mean cultural politics always have an agenda, that's for sure, and you have to respond to it somehow, to tap into it. But then within that framework you try to create as much free space as you can for the actual artistic work, and you're kind of brokering, mediating that space for the artist, with the artist, in relation to the funding bodies or the sponsors or whatsoever. And that is a very responsible and important role that we all have to live up to, actually.
I mean, it wasn't easy, but I did end up with having a little bit of privilege, which is being in Netherlands, where there is a lot of funding, but there is also funding is, I don't know how it's structured, let's say here, but like people who work in funds are active artists, filmmakers, people who experience what we are talking about. So the way you present the projects is quite straightforward, and the large amount of money that is there to be spent is there for you, and your projects are needed so the money to be spent. So in that sense, it's a little bit easier, but also on the other side, festivals are extremely important because they do make money. So that business side of music festivals, particularly where Netherlands is like, has all these bombastic festivals, I don't think that they're all great, but nevertheless they're seen as cultural form of contemporary heritage. They do contribute to tourism. They do create extra jobs for youth. They do create new music industry with culture politics. So all those boxes are ticking into funding, actually giving support to the, and of course then it comes the corporative or kind of private funding or investment, which I find much more difficult to navigate because you do need to adjust the values, the wording, it's weird, it's provocative, etc. But we are now in a crossing line in Europe where the funding that has been, for example, even in Netherlands, quite free, is being pushed by governments to make changes because of the political tensions worldwide. So, in that sense, I think we shouldn't take anything for granted, and it seems that navigating in both spaces, so governmental, local funding, but as well as private, is very important, and audience in plays important role, because if audience supports you, you sometimes actually don't necessarily need that much funding. But the tricky thing with audience is that everybody wants to be on a list. So nobody wants to pay for art and culture, but we make your lives amazing. So, so yeah, that's a kind of, again, depends from what angle you're watching it, but a kind of strange dance that we're all doing in a way to do what we do, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of hacks, like what Sarah mentioned and also what Jan mentioned about being able to work within the constraints. Like when it comes to fundraising, especially public money, sometimes there's like a sense like, oh, like this is detrimental that I have to comply to certain criteria, but that's like how a lot of things work, and being creativity is very much present in fundraising, like at least the way I sense it. And hacking it is a hell of a good way of like recreating certain components of what you're doing, what we're doing in a club or in or any other artistic space. So this idea of creativity definitely can bleed into fundraising and funding. But another thing that I'm recently more and more interested, especially when I was working in an art institution, or what can we learn from the business? Because the word business and arts are often like this no-go area. Like there's business that's supposed to support art, and there's art who's like asking for money. And why is that? Like I think taking back certain valuable ideas and insight that the business world and the whole idea like generated through decades can be enabling and giving certain capacities not only to fundraise, but to feel that you are capable of interacting with the monetary world, not completely succumbing to its rules and just doing everything for money or the way the funders want to, but learn from it, adapt certain things, and then develop from there in the intersection with whatever you're doing, be it running a club, a festival, an art space, a collective. All of those different constellations of people can interact with the monetary system, and having knowledge and capacity, I think it's a way to go.
Taut wie das. I think you're the only person who's actively living and working in Eastern Europe. What unique set of challenges do you feel like you face in this region, if any?
Yeah, I'm thinking if any, because like there is like a compound that I encounter when traveling. I do encounter like a bit of sense of exoticism, a bit of sense of patronizing, oh, you can do this festival in Eastern Europe, oh, how nice it is. Yeah, of course we can, There are different ways that we need to work in order to make it in a small city. But like with any smaller city and the big events, there are like myriads of challenges. So I think a lot of diversity or uniqueness of challenges sort of dissolved with the banality of economic growth. People can travel, can access to funding, and do a lot of things here. I think there are certain aspects that I wouldn't call challenges that are really unique, still very unique to the region. One is being this idea of what could be called in Lithuania davai padarom. It's called let's go, we can do it. This is the attitude that sometimes pushes aside certain let's say health and regulation or safety rules that would be applicable in the West, especially in the context of UK and Germany and Netherlands. Here we can work around it in order to make things really good and amazing things with maybe less resources that are just less available here. So that has the pros and cons, and that's up for a big discussion. But I think there is this desire that can overcome institutional barriers or bureaucratic barriers in say, creative, hacky ways.
Yeah, I was earlier today looking at the factory that you're going to be using tomorrow for these installations and the performance space, and it's crazy. I mean, it's because it's in use during the day, and it's just such an amazing, dynamic space that I couldn't really imagine, in Berlin or places that have a little bit more bureaucratic obstacles that might have to be overcome to access spaces like that. So I do see how there would be some advantages, actually.
Yes, it's a huge privilege to be like setting up a stage next to that person welding, like and working on this metalworks while the factory is still operating. I definitely think it kind of against some sort of healthy rules in like a Western context, but here it's a gray zone. But maybe I shouldn't speak so much about it.
Maybe I can just add. Generally, I think we as organizers, we need to have the multiple economies running in parallel, basically, as good as we can to remain as independent as we can, but as well as interdependent, as connected within networks of collaboration as much as we can. And from that versatility, we are able to build a richness, so to say. And what is important to me also is that within the ecosystem, the larger ecosystem within which all of our projects take place, this ecosystem needs to be kind of scaled or like versatile and diverse as well. So for example, I think it's very important that we have DIY spaces that are run outside the confines of public funding, that still have an economy that carries what people want to do within that kind of networks and spaces, and where people can have maybe a bit more like an unregulated, self-governed, and also more intuitive approach to what they really want to explore and experiment with. I think that the funding system that is crucial, of course, for many projects and for larger ambitious projects especially, but it constrains people quickly to kind of vocalize certain conceptualizations of what they want to do and so on avant la lettre, before they even have really kind of had the chance to experiment in a more like open form. And so that is basically a call to our cities and to our communities that we really need these spaces. They are crucial. They are the fundament, you know, the grassroots from which things sprout. And then you need like multiple layers where you can scale things up in different dimensions and in different forms. But if we just focus on one of those things, I mean, including what you said, like free enterprise, economy, I mean, that's another element. It also needs to be there, and we need to negotiate these things all the time, but be attentive to every of those fields and not neglect. That's very important, I think.
The funding that I was referring to in Netherlands is again a result of people who experience self-organization and squatting, and how the city can be taken by community or, you know, even improved. And so, you know, Amsterdam wasn't a city where everybody wanted to live. It was like with bad bathrooms, toilets, full of rats running on the street. And artists came, fixed it, renovated, and then suddenly it got the value. So, but also those people who experienced that kind of community were those who started creating funds in a way that they are today. So these processes take time, but they do come from a place of experimentation and experiencing of what it means truly to be part of community and think towards the others and not just self. And then, of course, that's not constant. That's something that you need to maintain. Yeah, I just wanted to, because we're speaking here a lot about self-organization and so to do it yourself and abandoned architecture, that through our rituals and presence start becoming cultural centers and places of value, also for businesses and companies later. So it's a kind of a ritual of repair in a way, yeah. You
mentioned earlier that there are a lot of identities that have historically been left out of, art, music, everything. But how inclusive and diverse do you find performance practices at the intersection of art and dance music to be? Because I typically think of these as being reserved for this elite echelon of art school educated experimental performers and composers. And I thought maybe, Sarah, we could start with you actually, because I know you're an associate at Condition Studio program, which offers resources for low cost and alternative art schooling.
Yeah, so Conditions is aimed at like a wide age range, I would say, and you don't have to have had any previous art education. The only thing that technically we look for is that you have a practice. So it's not specific to any strands or any art forms, and you can pretty much like self-define what that practice is and what it looks like. And it is like, I would say it's low cost for London, but it's not free. And you are paying for a studio space, which in London is increasingly hard to find, very expensive, not great conditions. If you have a window, it's like you've hit the jackpot. And so I think, the conditions can be pretty dismal. So we're trying to also shift the conditions that people are making artwork in, because that is affecting, their mental health and also the work that they make. A bit to go back to the self-organizing, the aim of Conditions as well is to encourage self-organizing. So I don't think any of it is like really reinventing the wheel. Like we still function a bit like an art school in the sense that I say that we've taken like what I liked from art school, so like the crits and inviting people to speak to you and to talk about your work. But we don't do assessments, like there's not really any kind of like formal feedback in that way, which I think like takes some of the pressure off and gives a bit more freedom to also what people feel like they can make. But I would say generally in London, it's so divided into scenes, which, I mean, like I would say I also do that. It's like I go to the clubs that I want to go to. I follow certain artists. I do certain types of research that I know will lead me to certain kinds of work, because in London on any given day you can go to like 50 events. So it's also quite overwhelming, and when you kind of find your niche, that feels quite special, and there's like something about protecting that feels like you really want to invest in like the people around you. But then of course that does also create these barriers, because also I remember when I moved to London, just like this complete sense of like UK culture shock, total overwhelm, so much choice. And then once you kind of find your place, you're like, okay, I'm not moving from this.
Well, maybe I can add, I mean, yes, of course, like writing up complex concepts of larger productions and then getting the funding, getting partners to produce the work and so on is hard to access for people who have not yet the network or haven't learned the specific language that is expected from you to be able to tap into that, or haven't really learned like all the different layers of production and these complexities. But I think that especially electronic music and club culture really come from that DIY space of self-empowerment. There's a long history of people really asserting their own spaces and creating without all of that formal education or training. And as a festival, for example, we also try to kind of foster that in our practice. And concretely, possible forms are, we do a lot of open calls, for example, where we kind of give commissions to produce new works, and we also assist the production of new works. And these are totally open, and I think we try to maybe also compose the juries in a way with artists and so on that it hopefully represents, the jury represents a diversity of people and of practices, so we try to lower the threshold basically, and also really target younger, or let's say not necessarily younger, but maybe people with a less developed, less visible practice, so that they get an entryway into such work and presenting it. And a concrete example I could give, for example, is a project we did with an artist group from Berlin called Black Swan. They work in like DAO and kind of blockchain technologies, and you know, we set up this idea that there is in that case a technological process through which applicants to resources that were made available by various partners would be allocated to the applying group by the applicants themselves, you know, without a jury, basically. So a self-organization, self-organized process in which the people also had to build coalitions and find kind of collaborators from within the group of people who have proposed projects. And then they got allocated resources to actually produce work, like studio space or production money, stages and so forth. So, and that is an example how you can try to kind of build alternative alternative entryways, multiply the possibilities of how to access resources.
Yeah, I feel that there are two sides of this question, or the idea of like excessive exclusivity or inaccessibility to arts. On one hand, and someone who's coming from like academic philosophy background, I feel that there is like absolute necessity to be really at certain points in a certain context, really conceptual, really deeply penetrating, and exploring ideas in their like most intense forms, because that also nurtures new ideas being wrought and new connections being made. On the other side, I feel, and something that I was thinking a lot when starting to work with the festival, AUDRA festival, and this art program, how to expose people to certain things and ideas. It was clear also, like at Rupert, I was curating an alternative education program, which like was very directly involved in like educating artists and providing opportunities, transdisciplinary exchange, etc. But then how do you do that in a context of the festival and the art program? And one of the examples was when Young Boy Dancing Room was performing in a steel factory last year. And Kaunas is a quite conservative city, so you would think that, you know, their performances are quite provocative. You do need to know certain things, I guess, in order to access it. But you can also experience it in a very visceral way. And during the performance, there was like this guy next to me who was like just a regular guy who came to the festival, probably didn't know about the performance. And at the beginning, he was in awe and even sweared at it and was kind of mad seeing all the nudity and everything at the performance. But as it continues, he was standing next to me and I was looking at him, and he stayed for a whole hour. He didn't leave, he didn't swear anymore, he was just in sort of awe. And I felt that exposure, I don't know what it like gave it to him, like what kind of access it provided or didn't, or if it's gonna have any impact upon that person. But it is inevitable that the experience happened. And doing these small experiments, doing these exposures, and seeing how they works in a way, this kind of creative art-led R&D when programming, I think is one of the options and ways to in programming, in curating, to see the reaction and to see how far you can go and how far you can push the limits and what is too much and what is too little.
I see Sarah shivering. I mean, do you guys want to keep going, or do you want to?
I think it's going to be interesting to give talk on the rain. I think the question is more for audience. Are they here just because it's raining and they can't leave? Or should we continue? Yeah.
Another 10 minutes, yeah. Do you want my jacket? Okay. Well, so I would love to talk a little bit about, we're living in the wake of multiple concurrent crises right now. Can and should institutions take stances on the great socio-political issues of our time? I mean, do festivals, events, people programming, as you do, have a responsibility to reflect what's happening, or to take a stance on it? And if so, are there implications for that?
Well, I was mentioning AIDS pandemic as an example where institutions stopped collaborations or presenting of certain artists, and then what happened is that most of the art scene moved to another place, which was nightlife and clubs. So when institution doesn't take a political stand that aligns with the values of community that they're presenting in a safe time, then that community will actually leave institution and find the places of self-organization somewhere else. So another interesting thing is that, of course, the question of financing, which is often very connected to it, and that's that, you know, you being alone and standing for something is not the same when you work in institution and you have 300 employees and this whole kind of network of people that you're responsible for. If institution doesn't take a stand, they lose the value, and therefore people move to something else. And then institution can revive when it's safe for institution to do so. You know, I kind of forgot, because like in Serbia, obviously you didn't trust government for, you know, forever. I still don't trust Serbian government. But you especially didn't trust government in times of war, because, you know, there was a corruption, there was a misuse. But then I moved to Netherlands, and I kind of forgot that because exactly of this sort of privileged position, till I met one older squatter who said, like, fuck government, never take money from government when you're doing your art, because sooner or later they will cut it for you. So we're experiencing that time now where it's this challenging of what institution of today is, how truly free you are, what are the values of different countries, and so it's time of crisis. But yeah, it's nice when institution can take a stand, but there are a lot of challenges at the moment.
Yeah, I think like organizations, institutions, of course, they need to have a set of values and be transparent about them and communicate them, make themselves approachable and responsible in that regard. And that's kind of important, as also what you said in regards to the various communities we work with. But I think we also have to see, or you have to see, like, what position, what role, what function has the organization or the institution. So it's different if you're like really representing a smaller, closer cut community, or you're running a community space, or if you're like more in a space where various communities and a diverse group of people and practitioners come together, where you're more of an integral, a space of, how do you say that in English, yeah, where you try to integrate people with different positions, actually, and so maybe conceptualize it more as a space of negotiation, as a space of open debate, ideally of discourse, of exchange and dialogue. And in that case, one has to reflect how a statement is maybe contributing to keeping that space open, or might also close it. And I think that is something you have to be very careful about. And then you also have to consider the diversity of the people in your team, in your wider network, in your closer network, that might have various positions and political views. And also here, you cannot speak as an organization just as you would do as a person, where you have a personal opinion, but then you represent a larger group with a variety of opinions, and it's a question of finding kind of fundamental consensus on certain things, and then there are things where you might not be able to find a consensus, and so you have to calibrate all of that in your communication, and make yourself accountable as good as you can, and have a set of values. But I think it's not always possible on each and every very particular political issue to take a decisive stand. Maybe that is sometimes even hurting the role of an organization, but it's something to be debated, you know, it's something to really kind of reflect upon, consider, discuss, negotiate. There is no simple answer to that.
Yeah, I think to follow up what Jan was saying just now, I think the institutions should take a stance, but we shouldn't expect them to take a stance. Because especially when you think about the bigger institutions or even the abstraction of an institution, there are so many layers to it and so many entanglements, and there are so many social political issues on every given day that you have to pick your fights. And you have to be either consistent with it or not. And in the end, whatever you do will be valued, evaluated, or judged by the people that you're working with. And I think it's a very natural process. And what Bogomir was saying, people are not stupid, and people that you're working with are not stupid. They will realize and feel and sense what is or what you're standing for, or if you're lacking our stance, or any other constellation of the ways you engage with these broad social political issues. And then people will gather, or people will leave, people will find new spaces, people create new spaces if they feel that the ones that they been relying on are lacking of certain features to them, be it a political stance, actions, or anything else. And with such a wide variety of ways nowadays we can express, like the institutions and individuals to that matter can express their thinking, their position, and their opinion, that expecting that this institution has to do this thing because I think that is right, it will just inevitably lead to continue the cycle of disappointment and dissatisfaction. I think focusing what you're doing and whom aligns with you, rather than trying to discern those who don't, is a way more productive way of organizing yourself and people around you.
Yeah, I think it's if the institution is built on, let's say, freedom of speech or inclusivity and diversity, therefore it's expected that that institution will speak in times of crisis. But I'm now thinking of another example. If institution takes care of cultural heritage of a country for 500 years, of course they will not speak, because they're jeopardizing a history of one country. So it really depends what are the original values of the institution in a way. So yeah, I was just started like thinking about all possible scenarios. So if you're art history museum, of course you're not gonna speak in times of all crises, because the strategy is that you take care of that cultural heritage. And so yeah, it's kind of, you need to choose your battle that you said. Yeah, I started thinking of that too. Yeah.
I think there's also maybe something else though, because if you don't take a stance as an institution, there's also repercussions. So you might get staff that feel, especially institutions that might have a legacy of transgressive politics, and then suddenly you decide not to speak about something that is maybe geopolitically seismic, then that's like also a very specific message that you're sending not only to your staff but also to your audiences. So I think there's also that to think about.
Well, on a closing note, what do you all hope for in the future of this kind of cross-disciplinary programming? It's a very big question, but I'm curious to hear each of your takes.
It's a good question. I don't know, I love dance, so more dance. Malik, make more dance.
Well, there's probably a lot of things, but I think one of the challenges we have at the moment, among the many, many challenges, but to have a better sustainable approach to the eco footprint of our production, of what we do as artists, as festivals, as organizers. And that ties actually in with also my personal, or maybe all of our wishes to, of course, we always want to make deeply engaging, substantial work that is kind of research-based, that is discourse-driven, that is in connection to what's happening in society and so on. And so my hope would be, and that's also what we're striving to, but it's hard, it's a challenge, that we can kind of make more in-depth kind of processes that have multiple dimensions, multiple outputs, a longer process of engaging with artists, with collectives, with the topic, with the research, with the search for the right form of how to bring it out, and yeah, a more resourceful process, basically, yeah, that is not so much only focused on an immediate output that brings the results, you know, but that we would be able to build structures that allow us to engage in a more meaningful way, and not only among, let's say, artists and producers, but along the way also with audiences, with participation, and so forth. And so slow down the process, basically, and not be so frantic about production, festival, stage, show, everyone overwhelmed, everyone crazy, everyone, you know, spending the resources, destroying the planet. So something like that. But I find it really, really difficult. Actually, the structures we work within are not tailored to accommodate that at the moment. And it's a difficult conversation that addresses almost all layers of our practice, I think.
I think about that all the time, and it's something that has been a recurring theme in all of my interviews and conversations with people over the last year or so. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, the dance was mentioned, and while we are here getting ready to dance, so-called Russian law is accepted in Georgia recently. They're now voting anti-LGBTQ law. We have, you know, we have war in Ukraine, we have war in Gaza. So what I was talking about is dance of urgency, that, you know, the movement sometimes happens because we simply need to move. But what I'm also alarmed is that I always thought it's interesting when we synchronize in a dance, but if the dance that I normally see, let's say on TikToks or on Instagram, looks identical, I'm a little bit alarmed, because I kind of think, why do all these people dance in the same way? Why they don't accept that when I dance, my move goes here and your move goes there? So I'm very much alarmed from an angle of studying dance, and especially how it's distributed on social media and what's happening in the clubs and festivals, the need to synchronize in almost kind of militant dance. So even that the music is electronic, and even that it's so-called techno, I'm very alarmed, because it does give me a sign of what we are doing sort of leaking into extreme mainstream, being appropriated, but also a sign of political idea that all the bodies should move in the same way. So, so yeah, the reason why I'm mentioning Georgia is because the reason why I like Georgia so much, and particularly this place called Bassiani, is because people danced in all kinds of ways, and they did not necessarily learn to dance in Berghain or in cool clubs. They just learned to dance for the first time together. And that butterfly, that original sort of birth of movement and choreography, is something that is very hard to find in Western Europe, because we're repeating the move. We need some kind of new formats, we need some kind of new movements, we need some kind of new music, which I think it's absolutely great what you're doing, like with constant curation of new music styles. And just one another example, when we were all in pandemic and lockdown, something fascinating happened in China and in Africa, which was suddenly the foreign DJs, again, very much Western DJs, did not travel any longer to China. So the local scene started creating music, and was not ashamed that they're not good enough anymore, and they need this kind of stars to come and play, and so it gave a birth of very kind of unusual music styles. So there is this moment of kind of sometimes slowing down in order that the others can reach or speed up. And it's same, I was mentioning Nyege Nyege Festival, lockdown in Europe, Nyege Nyege big African festival goes online and streams from different African countries, and it's just bombastic and fantastic how diverse music was there. That would not really happen if we were still bouncing in our comfortable lives, but the lockdown allowed us to somehow slow down a little bit. Not that I'm saying Corona was great, but it was interesting to observe what was happening worldwide at that moment. Yeah, so that's it.
But I think that's a really interesting point also about how there's another relationship for me between dance and rave, where like if those two things come together in terms of choreographic practice, I think there can be a lot of reinvention of technique, which I think is what you're pointing to. And yeah, so I'd like to change my answer to your question. It's dance, but with that.
Yeah, I think from choreographic point of view, you know, when our moves are very different, but we synchronize, that's wow. I like
yeah,
that
like in Michele's work, Michele Rizzo's.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah,
We're just nerds.
Yeah,
we'll have this conversation later.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel that a very wide spectrum of futures was touched upon. And I feel, for me, just really exploring the terrains that lie behind what I'm doing now, like the collaborations, the fields, the disciplines that are sort of present here, what is further down, like the curiosity and the alliances that we can make with certain fields or territories are very, very tempting, and looking into different scales from dance and movements and techniques that can form ways and pathways to collaborate and to think about, you know, the voices that are not heard in different circumstances, to more broad institutional development of more ecosystemic approach to not only to the nightlife and to the art world, but everything what we're doing and what kind of aspects that we can appropriate from the fields and the areas in life and phenomena that seems most threatening. Trying to like go heads on against something. It's fun, it's entertaining, but we can, like, I guess, keep entertainment for the dance floor and be like really strategic about developing what's around the dance floor, the infrastructures that we have and networks that we form to create the spaces for dancing and dancers.
Well, thank you so much. I am leaving this discussion with a lot of ideas about conversations I want to have more of in this industry and in the scene. So I really appreciate all of your thoughts, and for sitting in the rain, and for everyone who stayed and listened. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.